So we're rolling into the new year, and one of the things that we do at Path for Growth around the new year is start strong. Why is it important for us to start strong rolling into the new year? And what is that?
I have a mentor friend. His name is Dan, and I actually worked with him and for him for a period of time. And he would always tell me, Alex, you never have to recover from a strong start. And that's like so true, right? That when you start well, the one benefit to starting well is then you're not like, man, I have to recover. And man, what is normal in the United States today? We start by the last day of the year. We prepare for a new year where there's all this opportunity and optimism and hope and faithfulness. How do we prepare for that? We stay up way later than we should. We drink way more than we should. We eat absolute crap. And then we say, start weak, right? Like we don't start very strong. And what I'm so passionate about is instead of following what's quote unquote normal around this time of New Year, what if we said, man, what do I actually want to do? What do I feel called to do? What am I supposed to be faithful to, steward, and be responsible for in the year that's ahead, being 2026? And how do I make sure that, man, I obviously can't do all of that right now, but how do I make sure if I do nothing else, I start well? Because there is disproportionate momentum that can be gained at the beginning of the year. And why not ride that wave?
Yeah, you mentioned taking responsibility. How does responsibility weigh into a New Year's resolution, starting strong, starting the year off right?
I think it's so sad that sometimes you can talk to people, and I have been guilty, especially in my early 20s. I think I was guilty of this. I would say, I just don't feel like I'm growing. I just don't feel like I'm being poured into, right? I just don't feel like I'm moving forward all that much. And I would go back and shake my shoulders, be like, what are you waiting on, right? And one of the things that we all just would benefit so much from realizing is your growth is your responsibility. And that's so cool because it means that your growth is also your opportunity. And it's not like people are just going to come and say, man, I want to make your personal growth my primary priority. People can't do that. People are busy. And quite frankly, their growth is their priority too. And so if you want to grow this year, if you're going to move forward this year, one of the things that you have to recognize and that we all have to recommit ourselves to is it's a powerful day when we all learn that our growth is our responsibility. But then I get so unbelievably passionate and excited about this, right? Growth is in the name of our business. I think about it literally every single day. And it's just because you could be someone a year from now that you are not today, right? I have seen people become married. I've seen people who were on the verge of divorce become recommitted. I have seen people lose massive amounts of weight. I have seen people be able to run marathons, ultra marathons, Ironmans. I have seen people have children. I have seen people who do have kids become better parents. I've seen people go from business operator to business owner. I've seen people who were reacting as a lifestyle to go into a leadership position, right? I've seen all of that occur in the span of a year, and that could be you. Growth is available to all of us. It's just, are we going to take responsibility for it?
I feel like often the statement growth is your responsibility can be a hard pill to swallow. Why do you think that is? Like, what are some of the lies that people believe that lead to that belief?
Well, if it's not my responsibility, then I have a bunch of people and things that I can blame. And the minute I say that it is mine, well, then there's really only one person I can look at if I'm not growing, right? So if you are in a spot where you're not growing, the absolute easiest thing you can do is look at all of the reasons why you're not growing and point out every single one that isn't you and yourself, right? But we were actually called to self-control. That's another thing that I would say, Christianese can actually get in the way of healthy growth. And what I mean by Christianese is lingo that we put around Christian lifestyle.
Let go and let God.
Yeah, exactly. And we use it to excuse things that aren't actually faithful at all, right? And so what you said is absolutely correct, is people can be like, well, I'm not called to control the universe. And so I'm just going to trust God with all of this. And God did say you should trust him. And we absolutely should trust him because he's sovereign creator. But he also said one of the fruits of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. And so there are things that he's given us within ourselves that we have the ability to exert control and dominion over. And it's actually an abdication of responsibility whenever we don't live with that fruit of the Spirit, which is self-control.
What does it look like when someone overcorrects in this way?
Oh, man. There's a book called The Contemplative Pastor by Eugene Peterson that's such a good leadership book. And one of the things that he talks about in that book is that it's kind of an unfortunate reality that modern day English actually doesn't accommodate for a tense that is used in the original Hebrew and Greek of the Bible. And so he says basically the tenses that we have in modern day English are passive tense. This happened to me. Right. And it's basically the posture of a victim, right? All of these circumstances happen to me, and I am just the recipient of whatever God decides to do, right? That's passivity. Or there's the active tense, which is exactly what you said, the overcorrection to what we just talked about, which is I am imposing my will. I caused this to occur, right? I have heard people literally say, impose your will on the marketplace, and everyone cheers. And it's like, you actually can't do that, right? Like the marketplace actually doesn't respond all that well to your will. You can maybe influence it, but you can't impose it. And that hits on that tense. So he refers to it as the middle voice. And the languages of Greek and Hebrew that the Bible was written in actually accommodate for this, where our English translations don't. The middle voice, the best we could probably describe it is I am participating in the process of reality coming to pass. So it's not this happened to me. It's not I'm imposing my will and making this happen. It's I am an active participant in the process of reality coming to pass. And so that's such a healthy posture to hold, is it's like God is doing a thing. And let's be very clear, he's doing it regardless of how I participate. But I have been invited by this thing called life, and praise God for life. I've been invited to be an active participant into his will and what is going to happen coming to pass. And it's such a powerful day when I say I'm going to opt in, right? God, in some ways, God gives us, it's like the ultimate, like, he's not a spam emailer, right? He's not just sending us stuff and saying like, you don't get to choose whether you opt in or not. He's saying, do you want to click opt in? And it's our decision saying, I want to opt in and ask the question, man, what is God doing and how do I get in on that?
One of the things I think you just hit on that I'd like to zoom a little bit closer in is those two tensions, I guess more or less the victim mentality versus the
conqueror.
Conqueror is a good word. Both of those are so rooted in identities. Like as a victim, you believe certain things about your identity that are not true. And then the opposite, I think, or the exact same thing can be said about the opposite, which is, if you think that you are the center of the universe and you have all this power and influence, like your identity is just as off base as someone who with more of like a victim mindset, right?
Yes.
Centering yourself on the premise that like we are just participants in what God has created, and we can either joyfully participate in that and strive to create and strive to improve and influence the people around us in a way that honors God, or we can sort of sphere or skew off into these two realms of either like a victim mentality or conqueror.
It might be one of the greatest life philosophy mistakes that leaders make today is unreasonably tying contentment and joy to outcomes that you cannot control. And it's not even like you can't control them a little bit. It's like you cannot control those outcomes at all. You cannot control what other people do. You cannot control what other people say. You can't control the global economy, right? And people experience incredible amounts of dissonance or even depression whenever their expectations don't align with their reality. And our common reaction to that is shaking our fist at reality and saying it shouldn't be this way because this isn't what I expected. That is so prideful and ridiculous. It's not even funny, right? What we should be saying is, how do I make sure I properly set my expectations so that when, not if, when reality happens, because it always does, I'm not angry, depressed, upset, shocked, or blindsided.
So we've set the stage for, I guess, where you should be operating from in your starting strong. Let's move a little bit more into the practical of what does it look like to take responsibility.
Yeah. So 5 actions is what we'll kind of walk through here. And this is really kind of the primer for what we're going to do on January 5th. So these are things that you can all absolutely do on your own in your own time and take some time to do that. But we also do a guided public workshop every year that we open to everyone, just because I legit think these steps are for everyone. We've had teenagers walk through these steps, right? And they're just so helpful. So this is going to be the primer, and then we're going to do the virtual public workshop. It's a free workshop on January 5th, and I'm sure we can put the link to that in the show notes, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So with that, these 5 steps, people might say like, I don't really like those 5 steps. And I can ask, well, what are your 5 steps? They say, I don't have any steps. It's like, well, I like my 5 steps a lot better than I like your steps. The way I came up with these is not like I said, oh man, I want to design a personal year planning lesson for a bunch of people to walk through. That's not what I did. I, years and years ago now, got on a flight from Denver to Nashville, and it was a New Year's Eve flight. And it was like 9 p.m. at night or something like that. And, 9 p.m. flights, even on New Year's Eve, like there were a couple things going on. Like most people had their lights off and they were going to sleep. There were a couple people that were definitely knocking some back, right? They were having New Year's Eve early on the flight. And meanwhile, I've got my light on. I asked for a cup of black coffee, and I'm like, I'm going to crank out. By the time this plane lands, I'm going to have a plan for my growth over the course of the next year. And I had never done this before, but I remembered you never have to recover from a strong start. And I just said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I just know I'm going to do something, and kind of prayed about it and thought about it. And I actually walked through the 5 steps that we're going to kind of walk people through high level here today, and that we're certainly going to walk through on January 5th. And I've done these 5 steps, some version of these 5 steps every single year since. It's now what we teach to leaders around the country, because they're principle-based steps that when we do these things, they contribute to us having a plan. And it's amazing. If you've got a plan, you are way light years ahead of anyone that doesn't have a plan. And you're the person that I'm going to put my money on you growing. So that's kind of the primer for the 5 steps. Anything else you want to get into on that before we actually jump into them?
No, let's go. Let's jump in.
So number 1 is reflection. And the idea behind reflection is it would be unwise for you to go into 2026 without first looking at 2025 and just ask, how'd that go? It's crazy. You just did this thing called a year. Congratulations. That is a massive accomplishment. Like, that's one area where I think everyone on the planet should get a participation trophy, because that is a big ask, right? You did a year, and there was so much that occurred in that year. And so often we never pause for a single moment and ask, how'd that go? And within how'd that go, like, what did you do that was totally stupid that you want to avoid as we go into 2026? But then also, what did you do that went well? That if you look back and you say, man, that was actually like really good. And maybe it was good on accident. And you just took some time to ask, man, what could I do more of that would contribute to more of that good thing coming to pass for myself and others in 2026? It would be unwise to go into 2026 without asking the question, like, man, what did we learn from this year that we can take with us into the next?
So whether it was in that moment on the plane or years following, what's an example of something that you think you did really well and then you implemented the following year? And then what's an example of something you were like, this ends here and this isn't following me into the next year?
One of the things that I do is I'll list like we'll do this on the workshop on January 5th, is I'll list like what were highlights of the year, or what were times when I felt like I was at my legitimate absolute best. and I'll list those out. And that's what I did one particular year that I was walking through this reflection exercise, and I list out all the opportunities. And I really encourage people, don't overthink this and don't try to jump to conclusions about what you learned. Like, just brain dump, right? And just when you think back at your year, maybe scroll through your calendar, scroll through your pictures, be like, what were some of the highlights? What were some of the best moments? And I scrolled through all of them. And then I asked the question, after writing all those down, like, what common themes or patterns showed up there? And one of the common themes or patterns that I recognized is all of these, or many of these, were created by intentionally instigating something with other people. And like the with other people part was really, really key. And one of the things that I realized is there weren't as many of those things as I would have liked for there to have been. And so one of the things that I said is, man, I am at my best and I enjoy life the most when I intentionally instigate things and then invite other people into them. And so then I just said, okay, well, what am I going to do in whatever year this was? I think it was maybe 2022, 2023. What am I going to do in 23 that represents more of that? And I instigated more in 23 than I did in 22, and I invited more people into it. Now it's something that like I really actively tried to do pretty regularly, because it's something that through reflection, I realized that's when I'm at my best. And that's when I'm being the man and the leader that I feel uniquely called to be. So that's an example of reproducing or amplifying something that maybe happened a little bit accidentally. In terms of avoiding, I mean, there's a lot. I would say, I'm trying to think if it actually occurred. It probably gradually occurred in New Year's reflection. Is like, I would always come back to like, why do I drink alcohol? And that's I honestly think it's hard to do a reflection exercise and not ask that question, right? Like if you do drink, and a lot of times in reflection, I would be forced to sit with the fact that a lot of the people that I consider role models that I really, really respect in terms of what they've been able to accomplish, they just don't. My times when I'm at my best, it's not that I'm at my worst whenever I drink alcohol all the time, right? But my times when I'm at my absolute best certainly don't collide with the times whenever I'm drinking alcohol. And then the third thing I would say is it's actually counter. I realized through reflection, it's actually counter to so many of the other things I say I want to do. And so it's like, do you actually want to do these things, or do you want to be able to have a beer on Thursday night? And so I would say, it became less and less and less year over year to now I basically don't drink, right? I think in the past year, I've had 2 drinks, right? And those were good glasses of wine on special occasions, right? But I often think we don't examine those things that we just do. And we never ask, like, do I actually want to do this? And reflection helped me ask that question, and therefore helped create different behaviors as a result.
What's the next step?
Yeah, so it's reflection and then vision. And what we always encourage people on is when you're creating a personal growth plan, like what we're talking about here, it can be really easy to say, I'm going to create a list of action items or even habits, right? If you're thinking like James Clear, I would say don't start by creating a list of action items or habits. I want to ask people, who do you want to be at the end of this year? And the principle there is, I always think bad growth is rooted in what you do. So I'm going to the gym just for the sake of going to the gym, right? I'm reading books just for the sake of reading books. It's not rooted in anything other than the activity itself. And a lot of the data proves out that if you're just doing it and your reason why is because it's you believe like it's a something that you want to do, well, then oftentimes that's unsustainable. It's way more sustainable if you root it in an identity of who you are uniquely called to be. So bad growth is rooted in what you do. Good growth is rooted in who you are. I like to think of it as healthy growth is rooted in who God is. So what is the character of who God is, right? He's faithful, he's generous, he's compassionate, he's loving. loving, right? He's active, right? That's who God is. I want to align who I want to be with who that is. And that's what vision is. And what's so cool is you can envision a version of yourself by the end of this year that's not true today. You might not be someone that's generous today, and you could be someone that's outrageously generous by the end of 2026. But a lot of times it starts with having a vision of what you could be.
One of the things that I always think is so interesting is when people describe themselves as not creative, you know, and I think everyone is future minded. Everyone has a vision of who they could be, and that in itself is an expression of God's character, right? I mean, as the ultimate creative, I mean, I love the opportunity to sit back and think, yeah, like, who do I want to become? What do I want to accomplish? Like, who a year from now, writing this next plan for the following year, like, what do I want to be true that isn't true right now? And like, what then am I going to work towards that next year, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was in an exercise like this that I created my first ever vision charter, which is really a more blown out version of what we just do at the beginning of the year. And I wrote down some pillars of what I wanted to be. It was a spiritual stalwart, a strong husband and father, a centered business owner, a professional leader and communicator, a pillar of my community, and a faithful adventurer, right? And I have all of these written on a document. What's crazy is when I wrote that document, I was not married and I did not know Aspen. I thankfully I went in order. So I also didn't have kids. I didn't own a business, and I didn't have a place that I called home. So like strong husband and dad, pillar of my community, centered business owner, and professional leader and communicator. Those are all things that did not exist in my life that I was prayerfully saying, God, I would love for these things to exist in my life. But what's crazy is the minute, I think it's a step of faith, the minute you take the time to take those out of your head and your heart, say, God, I want to align these with your will. And then I want to take them out of my head and heart. And then I want to say, I'm going to pray for these things to come to pass. You start to see things. And you start to see opportunities. And I started to pray for, what do I want my wife to be like? And I wrote down words like confident, faithful, active, and fun. And what's crazy is I wrote down confident, active, faithful, and fun. And then I saw this cute blonde girl walk into church, and I talked to her for like 10 minutes, and she was like all of those things. And her name was Aspen, right? And it's like, I honestly think I wouldn't have even been able to see her if I couldn't have envisioned myself as the type of man that could marry a woman like that. And so what I would say is that's what vision is taking the time to say, man, what is God doing? And then how do I align my desires with that? Because he wants us to have desires. And then how do I attend to it? The final thing I'll say on that is the Message translation of Proverbs 29:18 is, when people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over themselves. But when they attend to what he reveals, then they will be most blessed. So I really think of vision not as just like, what do I want to occur? I think that's part of it. I think desires are often good and God-given, but that's not the highest version of vision. The highest version of vision is, what is God doing and how do I get in on that?
Let's move on to the next one. Action. Can you describe that?
Yeah. So we said vision is who's the man, the woman, the leader, the Christ follower, the community member, the husband, the wife, the parent that you're called to be. And in the workshop, we're actually going to spend some time writing down those identity statements. Then we shift to action, and action is basically just putting our work boots on. And I like to think of action in terms of actions, habits, and rhythms. And so we used to only teach this through the lens of habits. And the reason why I used to teach it only through the lens of habits is because I think societally, we are way, way, way too capable of over prioritizing extravagancy, like these one-off things, and way undervalue daily deposits and consistency, right? We're coming out with a morning routine episode here very shortly that's going to hit on the power of every single day, right? And so one of the things that we will do on the workshop is we're going to say, man, what are the things that you would do as a daily rhythm? And when I say habits, I mean daily. For me, I say habits are typically every day except my Sabbath day, which right now is Saturday. And Sabbath day is kind of like, do you want to do it today? So it's like my daily cold plunge rhythm on Saturdays. It's like, do I want to do the cold water today or no? Right. And it's choose your own adventure. Right. And so that's what habits are, is the daily. The rhythms are like weekly, monthly, quarterly things, right? So Aspen and I go on a date night once a week. We go to church once a week, right? We have specific rhythms for talking about our finances on a monthly basis, right? These are examples of rhythms that we have in our life, oftentimes that involve other people, that we say, man, this is going to make me into more of who I'm called and created to be. And then actions. What I've found is that there's two things that often get in the way for people achieving their vision. It's lack of clarity or presence of conflict. And if there's presence of conflict, like there's a conversation I've been avoiding, I want to read that book, but I just haven't gotten it yet. I want to write that book, but I haven't started yet. A lot of times, if there's conflict, like there's something that's causing you to not move forward, you do need to take massive action to get rid of that conflict, to just move the blocker. So a great example for me is like, I had said for quite a while, I want to be an author of a book, right? But one of the things I would always stall out on is the belief, whenever I was writing every day, I had the daily habit of writing, but the belief of like, is this ever going to become anything? Is this going to become like, or am I just doing this for no purpose at all? And that was conflict. And I would always stall out with that conflict until in an exercise like what we're doing right now, is a start strong exercise I was doing. The action that I wrote down is I'm going to schedule a phone call with a person that I know that is in publishing, and I'm going to send him the book and I'm going to ask him, can you evaluate this and tell me if I've got something? And then tell me, like, should I keep doing what I'm doing? Or is this like a wild goose chase that I'm on? Because I was lacking confidence and belief. And I did that. He was like, dude, you're crushing this. Keep going. And man, then the habit of writing every day became much easier because I had belief, but it needed the massive action. So when we talk about the third step of action, I want you to divide it into habits, daily, rhythms, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, and actions, the one-off things that you need to do to remove blockers and get clarity.
What's number 4?
Destination. So this really goes into healthy growth and the idea that we've already talked about at the beginning. You can't control outcomes. You can influence them, and your actions should influence them, and you should pray for them. And so we do the destination step really as a means of saying, there are certain things this year actively that I want to come to pass, that I deeply desire to come to pass, but I cannot control. And we should focus on the things we can control, but we should pray for the things that we can't. You know, so much of society today has maybe reckoned with the reality that you can't control those things, and they say, just give them up. And it's like, no, I don't think you should give up those desires necessarily, especially if they're God-honoring desires that could serve and love people. I think you should retain those desires, and you should allow those desires to inform a prayer life that is vibrant and active and passionate, right? A lot of times our prayer life is dead because our desires are dead. So when we talk about destination, what are you desiring to come to pass that you can't necessarily control? And man, this is a step that I am so grateful for, because I can look back at previous things that I wrote down and realize there are things that I wrote down in response to that question. What do you want to pray for? That I didn't even know if they could come to pass. And now it's just called life for me. Praise God for that, right? And it's such a shame that when we don't actually take the time to list those prayers, we don't actually notice them whenever he answers them.
Yeah. This last one we've already touched on a little bit, but I know you'll want to dive into this a little more. Elimination. Share a little bit more about what that looks like, evaluating your previous year, deciding on the things you want to eliminate.
Not everything should go forward with you, right? And so the framework that I like to think about is what's unhealthy, what's unhelpful, and what's unwise. And so it's really the elimination section in some ways that, like, you know, things like alcohol kind of, you have to wrestle with them. And I'm not telling people they can't or shouldn't drink, right? Like, I'm not saying that at all, right? What I am saying is make sure it's actually a decision, and that you're not just doing it because other people are doing it, or you're just doing it because you've always done it. Make sure it's something that you're saying, I'm choosing to do this, and these are the boundaries and the guardrails, and also these are the reasons why I'm doing this, right? I think God told us to delight in the good gifts that he's given us, right? And so we can apply that to alcohol, but unhealthy. When I think of what are the things that I'm doing that are unhealthy, so often, so much growth comes from the things that we're for and just envisioning and acting upon the things that we're for. But I can honestly say there's a lot of growth that comes from just stopping doing the stupid things that I have no business doing in the first place. And it's really humbling to look in the mirror and being like, what are the things that I'm actively doing, either because everyone else is doing them or because I've always done them, that are proactively contradicting the person I actually say I want to become? That's unhealthy. And then, we'll spend more time on unhelpful and unwise. But a lot of times leaders in particular, they are overcommitted. And then they add more at the new year and they don't eliminate anything. And that's unwise, right? And so if you're going to add on more, where's that going to come from? Are you going to have more than, are you going to sleep less? I don't know that I recommend that, especially if you're already tired. Are you going to maybe watch less Netflix? That might be good, right? Maybe that's a good way to trim some, but don't just say, I'm going to find a way to make this happen in addition to everything else I'm already doing. Actually wrestle with what you're going to sacrifice in order to make these changes in your life.
If there's one thing someone listening to this podcast could do at the end of it, what action should they be taking? What steps should they be making?
Well, I would say you should show up to our workshop on January 5th, because that's actually going to be the guided time where we actually say, okay, everyone now take 10 minutes and work on this. So the link to that is in the show notes. If you can't make that, totally fine. Schedule, 60 minutes to 2 hours for yourself, and maybe do this with your spouse. Reflection, vision, action, destination, elimination. Here's what I found to be true. You don't even have to have the most high resolution version of a plan with the Path for Growth logo all over it for it to be wildly effective. The difference between no plan and a bad plan is so massively valuable. I can't even begin to describe it to you. So just set your sights on creating a bad plan. And man, that's a great expectation. You're like, I think I could do that, right? And then do it. And I guarantee you it will have positive impact for you that you can then use to serve others.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Ben. Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for watching. If you want more content like this, we've got some killer stuff planned. So make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.